My name is Albert Titman. My most important role in my life is that of a father. I have 5 beautiful children and grandfather. I have 12 grandkids, and each and every one of them with their own personality types and their own gifts that they bring to the world, has taught me that I need to be in balance. And I need to be constantly focusing on my own mind, body, spirit. Every day, I don't get to take a day off. And included in that is reclaiming my identity as a Native man and learning what that truly means to be a grandpa and a father to these beautiful, beautiful human beings. And equally as important to that is I'm a husband. And my wife and I have been together for coming up on 28 years next month, and we've been married for probably about 9 years, because there were benefits to being married in the state of California. To get married in that way, but in a traditional sense, it's a different ceremony to unite with someone. You know, there's a story about the eagle's mate for life. It's a very powerful story. We try to live by that as best we can in today's world. By no means is it perfect. Most times it's like that. But we're striving for balance. I'm also a son. My mother is still with us on this side. She's a very beautiful Mexican woman. And my father was a full-blooded Native man. All 4 of those tribes. He's a California Native man. And he's unfortunately crossed over to the spiritual realm. But he's here in spirit. You know, I love my father. With all his imperfections, I've found a way to find perfection in his life and in his existence. And today, I'm going to share some of that story that is interwoven with the history of our people and my father's journey as well, and how that journey impacted my life. Also, I work at the Native American Health Center in Sacramento. I'm helping at Telewell Indian Health MAP project, and I also am a national trainer for an organization called White Bison, who develops curriculum-based interventions for Native communities that address issues of historical trauma, intergenerational impacts, and our own issues, compound and complex, these layers of trauma that we're learning to identify and find ways of healing from. And I'm also the chairman of the board of directors for the Native Dads Network, which is a grassroots organization in Sacramento, California, who our CEO, his name is Mike Duncan, and we travel around together to different tribal communities, and we really reach out to men. We're really reaching out to Native men to help them, as well as ourselves, reclaim our role and to truly understand the importance of fatherhood is sacred. The importance of fatherhood is sacred. Because too often what we've seen in my own home, in the homes in our community, is that we have absent fathers, or we have fathers who have been taught systemically what a Native father is supposed to be like, how he's supposed to act, how he's supposed to feel. And today we'll address a little bit of that, but that's one of the roles in the community that I've been blessed to be able to share with our people. And today I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. I have some slides that we put together. The first part of the slides are a part of the White Bison curriculum. And White Bison has developed some slides that, next one please. How our history impacts us today. And so we look at historical trauma, intergenerational impacts, and why we are the way we are today. Why do we have these things going on in our community, like fatherless homes, or opioid use disorder, substance abuse, domestic violence. And Don Coyce, if you don't know White Bison, you can look up White Bison, you can Google search Don Coyce and White Bison organization. He's developed through his own experience and with the help of many others, natives and non-natives, some curriculum-based interventions in this idea of creating a healing force. Next slide. So what Don believes and what we believe through this council of elders that help define is that there is a seen world and there is an unseen world. There is a physical world and there is a spiritual world that exists. And traveling around different communities across the United States, even into Canada, there are some universal teachings that almost all tribes believe in, that there is this connection from the seen world to the unseen world. That there exists something that we can't see, but we know it's there because we can feel it. You can feel tension in the room sometimes. You can feel fear, but you can't really see fear. You can feel anger, but you can't see anger. I can show you what it looks like through violence, maybe facial expressions and body language, but you can't really see it. It's a spiritual energy. Now, we've been taught, I know growing up, that spirituality, especially a native spiritual person, was like this person floating on pink clouds, and he enters the room and, oh, there's Albert, he's the spiritual Indian, look, he floats. And it's kind of a stereotype, and I even believed that growing up, like when someone is given a title of spiritual leader, that they're holier than thou, and it's simply not the truth. The truth is that what we believe is this spirituality is an energy that exists. It exists and it connects us all. It's this interconnected spirit that guides us through our lives every day. And we find it in different places. Not necessarily in organized religion, but some folks do. Religion teaches that. But for us, we believe that this interconnection to all things is the source of our native culture, this spiritual energy that connects us physically to all things. No matter where you are on the earth, no matter where you are, no matter what ethnic group, what race, in this construct of race by color, an American construct, helps us to understand that greater because that's what we've been taught in this society. There's some implicit biases that many of us operate under. I'm in that, but no matter where you are on earth, you have a gift. That you are gifted, that you are blessed, and this spiritual energy, no matter where, it connects us all. Connects us all. There are prophecies that have been told. The Hopi prophecy of 100 years ago, an elder talked about this spider web would one day cover the entire earth. A giant spider web would cover the entire earth, and what it would do, it would connect us all. It would connect us all. But 100 years ago, that Hopi elder truly didn't understand that today there is something that connects us all. And many folks, some of those elders today believe that it's the internet. It's the World Wide Web that is now connecting us all, and that Hopi prophecy is we're living in. That today we are in this great time of healing. There's a Lakota prophecy that there would one day be this great time of healing where all nations would come together and we'd share our gifts across the world, and we would bring these gifts to the table, no matter where you are in the world. But it would seem like the world was falling apart. It would seem like we were headed towards destruction and mass disaster. And we would feel that energy. And some of those relatives think that we're in that time right now. And I know I've been blessed to travel around different places and witnessing that exact feeling, that spirit, and that sense of spirituality. So spirituality can be positive and it can be negative, right? We have to maintain and find balance. And that's what these teachings teach us. So what we understand now are these 7 generation teachings. And these 7 generations teachings guide us to look back 7 generations to how life was a long time ago, and to understand each generation, how it's impacted our life today in our tribal communities, in the world, right? We can look at any group of people and look at our history, look at our culture, look at our traditions, and look back and So what we believed a long time ago, this is how our communities look, this is how our tribes look, our villages. And we understood that at the root of who we are as indigenous people is healing, spirituality, ceremonies, language, cultural values, elders' teaching, interconnectedness. And they were guided by natural law, by a vision, established with principles, laws, and values, natural law, that these things existed. They guided us as people. So what we knew is that the children, they were taught by the adults, and that those young boys, they went to the traditional warriors to learn how to be a warrior, to learn how to hunt, to learn how to fish, to learn how to love, nurture, right? They were being taught what a true Native man is supposed to be, how he's supposed to feel, his behavior for his people, to the women, to the elders, but also protect, right? Not this idea today that what's being taught, what an Indian warrior is, and what the stereotypes are about Native men in our communities. We do a good job, I'm guilty of it at one point in time in my life, is buying the lie about who I was supposed to be as a Native man and as a father. I don't have to drink and go under the table, that's a lie. I don't have to be a womanizer, that's a lie. I can say I love you, son, that's the truth. Crying is okay. Doesn't make me weak. As a matter of fact, the strongest warriors know that it's okay to cry when it's appropriate to cry. So those teachings have been taught and handed down. The women, the young girls, went to the women, and the women taught them in the tribes. We see it today, how to be women, what their role was as women. Many of our tribes, my tribes, all four of those tribes are matriarchal societies. That the women were our leaders, they were our decision makers. The men respected their role. It wasn't a hierarchy. Men didn't sit at the top and women were subservient. There was equality and fairness, compromise. And the women taught the young girls about their role. We had ceremonies, womanhood ceremonies, puberty ceremonies, rites of passage ceremonies. Again, the young men went to the adult men to learn how to be traditional men, how to make a drum, how to gather wood for the fire, how to make a copper stick, the purpose, the discipline, the responsibility and the commitment to that. The gata, a rattle, what this rattle is used for. It's not a weapon. Spiritual tool. So when we use this, boy, Dr. Waller yesterday talked about dopamine in the brain. This is my dopamine. Right? Because it really does that. When we use this in our ceremonial places, it makes you feel really good, man. It increases the spiritual level in your brain, and it emanates to the rest of your body. So when you come from those places, man, it's like this euphoric love that you've never experienced before when we go to those places. Very powerful. The young men went to the adult men to learn those things. The young women went, they learned how to make a basket. They learned how to gather medicine. They learned how to gather pine nuts and acorns. And then they learned how to preserve them and prepare those for the next winter month, or springtime, or summer. Like, those things were taught. How to make our umacha, our bark houses, those dwellings where we would live during different times of the year. All those things, we understood those things in our tribal communities. And the adults, they went to the elders. And the elders had that wisdom, which we understand now as lived experience. We have knowledge, and we use that knowledge. We're learning that from the moment we're born from our parents. They give us teaching. And we apply that in our life and we become wiser. And those elders who have lived 70, 80, 90, 100 years, that they have that lived experience along with that knowledge, and they teach, they taught. And even today, I see it in my communities now as things are shifting back. They teach the adults. What they're teaching is one day you're going to be an elder. And this is how you're supposed to behave. These are the things that you're supposed to teach. This is the meaning of that. This is the spirit of that. And so we understood that. The men, again, the elders, they understood their role. They understood that they had a responsibility. And the responsibility was to teach what is at the root of our villages, of our family. They're supposed to teach these things. The healing, the spirituality, the ceremonies, the cultural values, the language. Language is so important. The language connects us spiritually to all things. There's a word for everything, just like in the English language. Very connected language, especially to all things, the earth, fire, the water, the plants, the animals, those things that I offered prayer for this morning. The language connects us to those things, to each other. It's a very powerful language, the native indigenous language. Again, their responsibility was to teach those things, to keep those things at the root or the core of who we are. And what that means in our communities today, when we look, what it really means is at the core of who we are is family. It's family. That's what that is. It's an image of our family that extends out to the community and the nation of people. There are over 500 tribes, 570-something federally recognized tribes in the United States today. California has the second most of any other state behind Alaska that has more than 200 tribes federally recognized. And in California, there are many more tribes that are state recognized, not federally, but the state recognizes them as indigenous to that area. And there are many more on top of that who are reclaiming their identity, and they're in the process of applying for re-recognition by the federal government. Next slide, please. So then, something happened to us. And what we know it today to be historical trauma. We went from this beautiful, beautiful system of life to this. We went to historical trauma, the effects of historical trauma. So pre-contact, we look back to how indigenous life was, and then post-contact. Now there's a lot of history to talk about. Even within our own tribal community, it's not like life was perfect all the time, but we lived by a set of principles, laws, and values that would help us maintain balance. Tribes warred with each other. There's no doubt about it. The Plains, some of the East Coast. Some of the stories about California tribes is different. California is unique in the history of first contact. First contact, they say, happened on the East Coast, and the migration west. It's written in some of the history books. Not the full history, but it's there. In California, and genocide really happened in California, more than any other state. And I'm a California Native man, and that wasn't taught to me growing up in elementary school. It wasn't taught in middle school. It wasn't taught in high school. And we're barely learning about it in Native American Studies programs across the United States and universities and other institutions of learning of what happened to our people. But what we see in our communities today is this. We see high rates of alcoholism, domestic violence, drug abuse, unhealthy relationships, codependency, victims, sexual abuse, dysfunction becomes normal. Like some of these things, these maladaptive behaviors, they become so ingrained and transmitted generationally, intergenerationally, that they become normal. I hear it all the time. You know, back home I facilitate a number of different groups. One survivors of domestic violence, batterers intervention, anger management, and it never fails that there's always someone that says, Albert, that's just normal. It's just the way it is. My family's like that, been like that, never going to change. This is who we are. You don't mess with us. We don't take no crap. You mess with us, this is what you get. Except you're doing it to your own wife. You're doing it to your children. That's not normal. It's not okay. It's a problem. And then we talk about how that happened. Next slide. Effects of poverty. So we know that as this systemic history, governmental policies, forced removals, relocations, longest walks, placed on land that in many cases we weren't allowed to fish, hunt, gather, to live our own ways. We had to survive on government rations for a long time. This is what we saw in the effects of poverty. Loss of hope, access to adequate health care, so the disparities in health care, education, limited access to treatment, single parent families, we've seen that. Our women have been the backbone of our people for a long time. And in our matriarchal societies, there was always balance. We honored each other as men and women. And we have to come back and teaching that to our young ones. But what we've seen over the past few generations is that our men have been displaced. There's something that happened in this history that removed the men. And it's been a struggle for us to reclaim our roles. It's happening. We're seeing it in communities. We've been here to Bishop a few times and helped them start a Fatherhood to Sacred program, and it takes time. These things don't change overnight. It's been generations of trauma, layers, really compound and complex, and then we have our own stuff that we have to work through. As we see at the root of what happened, our principles, our laws, and our values, we got knocked out of balance. And now they're being fed anger, guilt, shame, and fear. Again, more effects of historical trauma. Fathers in prison. Gang influence is at an all-time high. Mothers in prison. Homicide. Lateral violence. Lateral oppression. Internalized oppression. Where we've been taught to hate ourselves. And it's so deeply ingrained, we can't see it sometimes. It is very powerful. CPS. Are there any CPS workers in here today? Yeah? I want to acknowledge you. It's a hard job. You know, it takes a special person to become a CPS worker. I didn't always believe that. Yeah, there was a time in my life where you were part of the system, which is part of the problem. And I want to acknowledge you because I have a lot of admiration and respect for that work today. There was a time in my own work, I was interning at the county alcohol and drug programs in Sacramento. And we were housed in the same building as Child Protective Services. So I was allowed to sit in trainings with you all and got to meet a lot of social workers that were CPS workers. And I now have this profound, newfound respect for CPS workers that I didn't have before. Because it's a really difficult job to be a CPS worker. Because most of the CPS workers that I met had really good hearts. They were human beings. They had great intentions. They wanted to help children who were stuck in situations that they didn't have a voice. They couldn't speak for themselves. And unfortunately, it meant sometimes we have to remove kids. My presentation in the next slide is going to talk a little bit about why that history, for me, I had so much disdain for that system that I came to understand now why we have these things in our community. And I have great relationships in Sacramento with Child Protective Services, and we've really advocated for incorporating Native American CPS workers and advocates so that when our kids are caught in the system, ICWA applies, but it's being applied fairly because our people are now advocating and understanding. And so thank you for the work that you do. Next slide. How was this done? How was historical trauma affected upon an entire nation of people, from tribe to tribe to tribe? Well, there's something that happened that we understand now, that we were removed from the spirituality. They removed us from all those things that we believe connected us and interconnected us. They removed us from our ceremonies. They removed us from the land. They removed us from many things. They took our family systems and they turned it upside down. That's what happened. When you remove us from the spirituality, from all those things, which is an energy, it's a system that is in place. Something happened. So we believe in the history that impacts us today, there's a great understanding of the boarding school. Carlisle Indian School in the 1800s, early 1800s, was developed by the government and by General Pratt as a model school for nearly 500 set up in the United States. And what that was designed to do, it was designed to take Native children out of their homes, off their reservations, off the rancherias, wherever Native children were, and take them, or forcefully remove them. It wasn't a choice. It wasn't a reason that maybe today, if we talk to CPS workers, they've been trained, to really assess and evaluate and have good reason. And some might argue. But then it was the military came in and took kids just because they were Indian. There's no other reason. They wanted to assimilate them into the dominant culture because they believed at that time that's what was good for Indian people. We have to teach Indian people to be like us because they're savage. It's really clearly and plainly. Kill the Indian, save the man. That was the moniker of the boarding school era. Kill the Indian inside of these children and save the human and assimilate them into the dominant culture. 500 boarding schools across the land. And this is what you see as a result of that. Again, we see that intergenerational. So what happened was the children were taken to these boarding schools, one by one. They were taken away from the healing, the culture, the spirituality. They were taken away from all those things, and we started to see communities fall apart. We started to see those things really have a major impact. Depression, alcohol use. And what happened was there was no more teachings of the healing, of the spirituality, of the ceremonies. No more language, no more cultural values, no more elders teaching, and they were disconnected from those things. And we're talking 3, 4, 5 generations, depending on where you were in the United States. Here in California, we kind of got the double whammy because pre-contact, we had Spanish invasion. We had Spanish conquest here. We had the mission era, and that was before boarding school. That was before the Spanish-American Wars. The Spaniards had come and they really decimated our people, especially along the coast. And those mission schools were equally as torturous for many of our people. And I share this because I have first-hand experience and impact. This is my father, my uncle, my auntie. They were all taken away at 5 years old. My father was 5 years old. My uncle was 7. My aunt was 8. They were back to back. And they were taken away from the only place they had ever known to this boarding school, where my father was right on the other side of Yosemite here. There's an old Catholic boarding school there. It was really a church, kind of like a mission, right? And he had spent all of the rest of his childhood there, where he was sexually abused, physically abused, wasn't allowed to speak his language. He got caught speaking his language, and he got severely beaten for that. cut their hair, shave them, deloused, given cod liver oil for speaking this language. Sexual abuse in many of these places, and I have been, I say blessed because it taught me a lot of things. To travel around different places and then to speak with different elders that would tell their stories about the trauma they experienced in these places. And sexual abuse was used as a disciplinary tool. And it was taught by those folks that ran some of these. And these are the church, Protestant, Catholic, Mormon, Baptist. Within some of these churches, the churches were also a part of the teachings at these schools. My father was at the Catholic boarding school. And what happened was that then he was taught to sexually abuse other kids for discipline. So they taught him he was sexually abused, and as he got older, to teach the new kids that came in when they were sexually abused as a punishment by the other students. Trauma. Can't imagine that happening to any of my kids, my beautiful grandkids. But the government just decided one day, because you're Indian, we got to take you and take your children and lock them up in these schools and teach them a lesson on how to be, strip them of their identity, their culture, their traditions, their ceremonial ways, their life, because you believe that they'd be better off speaking English, praying to Jesus, wearing these shoes. Because what we've seen replace that were these beatings. What replaced those teachings was we didn't have our language anymore that connected us to all things. What we see again, we see no teachings as far as the cultural teachings, none of that, all gone. What replaced them was sexual abuse, right? Ugly sexual abuse. Soap in the mouth or cod liver oil in the mouth. Excellent. No ceremonies. Our ceremonies are powerful. Many folks, I don't know if folks understand, even our own people, because growing up I didn't understand our ceremony. Those places that we would go, sacred mountains, rivers, creeks, our ceremonial houses. A lot of people have adopted the sweat lodge ceremony as a place of healing. I didn't know that growing up. I didn't understand what that meant. Honestly, I thought, no, it's just those Indians over there, that's what they do. Because I was raised in a church, Catholic church. I didn't have a bad experience in Catholic school. My father did. My uncle did. Come to find out, my grandfather before him, my grandmother before them, they were all products of boarding school. Intergenerational. This goes back a long way. We were sitting at dinner last night. We were having a discussion, and Dr. Wallace started talking about epigenetics and looking at the 7-generation teachings. We go back 7 generations to understand. And then, so that I understand where I'm at, how to heal, so that I can teach the next 7 generations. So that's 7 generations from now. Epigenetics. That maybe they have a better chance of escaping all those things that we see in our communities and our families today. And that all of you who work within Native communities have a greater understanding now. When a Native person comes to you and they don't trust you, they're shutting down. They're carrying these behaviors and even they don't understand why we have these things. And so what we see is there's no culture. Cutting your hair. Cutting your hair is important for many tribes. I know my tribe and many of the California tribes, cutting our hair is very significant, symbolic. And for me, my hair represents the umbilical cord to the earth. My umbilical cord to all things, but it also represents and symbolizes that my mother is still alive. My mom is still with us. She hasn't died. So if you ever see me with the shaved head, from this point forward, you know that I'm probably grieving the loss of my mother, because that would mean my mother is dead. So if you've been taught this in your life, and you go to this place and you shave your head because they want you to have a nice flat top, you know, they think you have head lice, and you're like, wait a minute, I've been taught that if you cut my hair without a ceremony, there's a ceremony attached to it, that my mother's dead. And so there are stories that there are kids crying throughout the night because they thought someone in their family had died. And some tribe doesn't necessarily have to be your mother, but it's someone in your family, someone significant and important has died. And so you can confuse a child. Next slide. So what we see is those kids came home. They came home, and one by one, the children came home, and what we started to see was the first instances of extreme alcoholism. And not that alcohol wasn't already there, because it was already there. But then it started to become a way of coping, self-medicating, especially from the trauma, right? There's actually history, and if you ever get the Red Road book, The Red Road to Well-Variety, there's a story in there about Chief Gun and Dial, Hansel Lake from the Six Nations Iroquois. And that 300 years ago, there's evidence that he had started a sobriety circle using culture. He made attempts at getting withdrawing, detoxing, and the elders and ceremony people helped him in a ceremonial way using culture to detox. I don't know that I would recommend that today, only because that knowledge has been lost. So what we see now is we've seen these kids growing up, and what happened is they became parents. They became parents. So the abused became parents. And what we see is that violence, that alcoholism, those behaviors, they start to get handed down to the children. And that's intergenerational trauma. That these things start to get handed down. Sexual abuse starts to get handed down. And that's the legacy of the boarding school era, the mission era, the residential institutions in Canada. Like, this is not 500 years ago. It's not 200 years ago. It's not even 100 years ago. It's our lifetime. It's right now. And I guarantee you, yesterday there was an elder in the room that had experienced a boarding school. And if you're a Native person in this room, you have been impacted by this era. You can't escape it. It's there. Now, I'll tell you, I have a 90-year-old auntie. She lives on the Pitt River Reservation up in Vernon, California. And I got to go see her. She's my grandmother's youngest surviving sister. And we were sitting with her in March, and we started talking about, family history. And I wanted to know about the boarding school era. And sure enough, she'd been taken away to boarding school. And she said, but my experience in boarding school, I have a tendency to go into character. But she's like, grandson, but my experience was a good one. It was really great. I didn't have the problems like all those other kids, because I did what the nuns said. I didn't speak the language. I just wanted to be just like the nuns, because I didn't want to get whipped like the other kids. So I went on and I became a nurse, and I did what the nuns said, because I knew what was going to happen. She had a great experience at boarding school because she assimilated, because she was a good Indian. She did what they said to her. She behaved, which tells another story about the act of genocide. So it's internalized now. She said, I wasn't going to be like them other bad Indian kids. I was going to be a good Indian. And we could go into all day about the discussion about what that means for that era. So historical trauma, what we know now, is a combination of immense losses and traumatic events that are perpetrated on an entire culture. On an entire culture. And how do we know that? For Indian people, it meant loss of land, culture, language, land, people. We lost people due to death, diseases, and war. Our overall way of life, our religion, our culture is our religion. It is embedded in that as who we are. And our religion, not in the sense that anything is written in text, but this spirituality and this interconnectedness to the land, to the water, to the plants, to the animals, to all things, the air, the fire, the ceremonies. And then more importantly, man, our family structure. Forced into boarding schools decimated our family structure. Can't imagine you go into an entire tribe, let's say you were bishop here, and the government went in, and it did happen. It really happened. Went in and removed generations of children and took them to boarding school, Stewart Indian School, right here in Nevada. It's not that far away, and I'm pretty sure there are other schools that we don't know about. We know about the famous ones that existed. The one right on the other side, Chemawa, not even that far away either. That there are relatives that were taken away as children and assimilated into the dominant culture and then sent back. And in many cases, you went back. I've heard stories from elders that said they went back and they just didn't feel like they belonged there anymore. They had been away most of their life, 10, 11, 12 years, rarely got an opportunity to go home and visit. Rarely was the families able to travel far enough to come and visit. Sometimes 100, 200, 300, 400 miles away. And so they were disconnected. It decimated our family system. I know for my grandfather, when my dad and my aunt and my uncles were taken away, it destroyed their marriage. My grandparents ended up falling apart. My grandfather became a raging alcoholic and became abusive, so they turned on each other. Lateral violence and oppression. He felt helpless, hopeless, couldn't fight the government. Because when those relatives did try to fight, especially the men, guess what happened to them? They were killed. Attacked the men, because men tried to stand up and fight for their children. So there are a lot of stories of that's what happened. And in California, it's written. I'm not making this stuff up. I wish I was, but it's not. From 1851 to like 1872, I think it is, California, the government of California placed a bounty on the head of California Indians, women and children. They actually paid militia groups, and most of them were white militia groups, and actually all of them were, to kill the Indians. And if you brought their scalps back, you got paid money. In Sacramento, where I live, at City Hall, or the Capitol building there, you would take these scalps of men. You got more money for the men, less money for the women, less money for the children. But if you had the ears attached, some of the stories, it's written, research it please, that you got more money if you brought in ears. And there are images of people wearing ear necklaces as trophies. Had these ear necklaces. And, it's really ugly history. And it really destroyed family systems. Also in California, what happened here, it happened all across California, is that there was this idea of indentured servitude, so that if someone saw a native family and they appeared to be homeless, that you could take them and indenture them. And you could literally take them to court. And in court, the justice system would grant that person, that family or those people as indentured servants, which really is just a nice way of saying slavery, right? There's a couple written, documented stories of, gosh, I can't think of the person. Really, I mean, I'm so grateful because there are historians that have written this history that were non-native, that chronicle this history so that generations later we can read it and go, wow, that really did happen. This is the truth. It's written in old law books. Thank God it's no longer on the books, but it's still there for us to take a look at and really acknowledge that really this really did happen, like not that long ago, where a man killed the father and took the mother and the children to court and was granted indentured servitude. When the judge asked, where's the father? The man said, well, I killed him. And he's dead. You didn't go to prison for killing an Indian in those days. You didn't go to jail. It wasn't against the law. It was actually okay. And was granted the mother and the children as indentured servants. And that was a matter of course. That was normal in California. So California has a unique history where we got hit pretty good with some of this historical trauma. Next slide, please. So how do we know about intergenerational historical trauma? Well, there's tons of research from other ethnic groups. This didn't happen to us. It happened across the world. This isn't new. This is Jewish Holocaust. There's a lot of research written about Jewish Holocaust and its survivors. And more importantly, how they've been able to heal generation after generation. They found a path of healing to this day. I know a lot of them. They're my really good friends. A lot of Jewish relatives, and some of them work at the Native American Health Center. And we have a great relationship and understanding. Japanese internment camps here in the United States, there's research about the impacts of that trauma, African American slavery. You know, if you don't know some of that history, you know, I'd have to ask you where you've been for the past 20 years. Because there's a lot written on African American and the historical trauma and slavery and the impacts of slavery, Central American refugees, and more recent studies on Native American. It's more recent. We've been here the longest, but the studies about our trauma are more recent, really within the past few decades. And there's a couple people that I admire, and I've done a lot of reading on their research. One of them is Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart. I love her work. I got to meet her personally, and she's a genuine woman with great intent, a Dakota woman who's done some amazing work in identifying this trauma, the intergenerational impacts, and really, how do we get to the healing? How do we get into the healing of that? Eduardo Duran and his wife Bonnie Duran, they've done some work, even some curriculum development around addressing and healing from historical trauma. One of the books they wrote was Healing the Soul Wound, which is a really great read if you ever have an opportunity to read some of their work. And there was a professor of psychology out of New Mexico State University, I believe it is, and his name is Joseph Gahn. Joseph Gahn has done, he's got some work that he's done. You can actually YouTube him, and he's got some PowerPoint presentations where he talks about the psychology of trauma amongst Native people. Next one. How does trauma get passed down through generations? Well, as human beings, we adapt, right? We evolve, we learn to cope somehow, either positively or negatively, like the spiritual energy will guide us one way or another. I know my father, during his life, he didn't have PTSD diagnosis. It just didn't exist. He didn't have the resources that we have today. We're kind of blessed that we have some resources. And no one was offering that when he came back. You know, because from boarding school, he ran. Got in trouble with the law. Him and my uncle, one time, they got arrested because they had broken into a store while they were on the run from the boarding school because they were hungry. And told me the story of that. Then they got beaten and taken back. But finally, one time when they got caught after running, they were sent to reform school. They got sent to reform school, which today would be the equivalent of juvenile hall or juvenile justice centers, YA. And there he was around 13 years old, 12, 13, and he spent the rest of his life in a reform school until he became an adult, 17. And then he was sent to the military. So he was sent to fight for a country that despised him. And this is a history from a lot of our war veterans. Like we honor our veterans, like I do. I honor my veterans. And I know some of our relatives that struggle with that. Because how can you fight for a country that despised you, that did that? But I get it, because I understand the trauma. I understand the layers. And I understand that for someone to fight for a country, it took a lot of resilience, a lot of understanding, some level of brainwashing to get to that place. My uncle went to the Marines, and he actually was in combat. My father was dishonorably discharged because he said after a while, he is like, F the government.
you don't really like me. Hey, look what you did to me. Look what you've done to other people. Why would I want to fight for oppression? Why would I want to fight for freedom when in fact he's never been free in his life? He couldn't do it. So he had this label, that dishonorable discharge, carried with him wherever he went. Oh, you're a dishonorable discharge. Yeah, you're one of those Indians, aren't you? He carried that. But what he carried most tragically was complex and compound trauma. And he became my dad. And became the father to 7 of us. So what kind of father do you think he was? A loving, nurturing, caring? No, absolutely not. He wasn't. As a matter of fact, he was totally opposite. He didn't know how to love and nurture in the way that I have learned how to do that with my children. He didn't know how to do that. He wasn't taught that. He was raised in a system that despised him and despised everything he stood for as a Miwok, as a Maidu, as a Nishinel, as a Big River man. He was taught everything anti that as a kid growing up. And it was severely abused out of him. I mean, that's extreme brainwashing. It's genocide. Now, I understand my dad. I forgive him for a lot of things because now I have a greater understanding of what happened in his life. He became a raging alcoholic. He developed those defense mechanisms and those coping skills that can be detrimental. And for many of our Native people, many of us enduring immense loss, unresolved grief, and past traumatic stress can become a way of life. Like, we've normalized this in our communities. It's scary to think. People believe that feeling numb, being angry, acting self-destructively, and feeling hopeless is a normal way to live in this world today. My father was a prime example of that. He was one of those ones. That's what a Native man is, son. No, I don't want to see you crying. Men don't cry. Miwok men don't cry. It's a sign of weakness. You're being a sissy. I mean, wow. Yeah. Fall down, cry. Stop crying. What are you crying for? Get up, dust yourself off, be a man. And don't cry. What does that do to a young boy when you're growing up? Does it teach you respect? Does it teach honor? Does it teach resilience? I don't know. I don't think it teaches that. Honestly, I think it teaches opposite. We see that, and I know in the work that I'm doing with my people, I see that our people come in, a lot of times the men, and we start talking about historical trauma in our groups and our classes, and we start to peel away these layers, and you start to see light bulbs going on. Because I was teaching my children about the history, and being their father, I wanted them to know about, gosh, is it that much time already? Jeez. 5 minutes? That's okay. I wanted my children to understand. I wanted them to know who they were and to be proud of being Miwok and Maidu. But I also wanted them to understand the history so that the next generation would have a greater understanding, could reclaim and own our identity, be responsible for who we are, no longer laterally violate and oppress each other. I didn't want that for my kids. I didn't want my children's story to be my story, to even be my father's story. And I don't want that for my grandchildren or my great-grandchildren. I want them to be proud of who they are, to understand, but to no longer be victims of this system. Because that's so deeply ingrained. My father was a victim. There's no other way to explain that. He was a victim of that system. And he handed those thoughts, those feelings, those behaviors to each and every one of us. And I guarantee you, when I was a young man growing up, I was teaching that to other people. Because when I was scared, I was violent. When I was sad, I was violent. It just never, and if violence didn't work, I also drank. Because that's what my father taught me. When you're mad, you drink. When you're sad, you drink at funerals, you drink at birthday parties.
You drink at Christmas and Thanksgiving, because don't you know, Thanksgiving is not our holiday. It's a white man's holiday. Right? You are all the problem. My dad was like, it's there. It's the white man's problem. They're the reason why we are the way we are. It's their fault. You could never shake that. For one, there was no treatment for him, and if there was, he didn't trust it enough to go. Like, he was never going to go to a clinic. He wasn't going to go see a psychiatrist. He wasn't going to go visit an LCSW. He wasn't going to do that. I mean, his trauma was so deeply ingrained in his spirit, there was never, as a matter of fact, he had nothing nice to say about the church. Despised that my mom or my grandma would send us to the Catholic Church. You know, he hated that. I was teaching my kids, showing them a video one day. My dad was living with me. He had gotten sick, and I had forgiven him already. I'd done some work on myself and trying to have a great relationship with my father. He had a stroke. He was surviving that. He came to live with me and my wife and my kids. And I was teaching my kids, and I was showing them a video about boarding school. And my dad was sitting there, and he was sober. He couldn't go to the store, and I damn sure wasn't going to be buying him booze, as I was on this journey of abstinence myself. And what happened is, I have 2 minutes to go. What happened was, he said, "I've been to boarding school." And I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "Dad, you've been to boarding school?" He goes, "Yeah, I went to boarding school on the other side of Yosemite, me and your uncle and your aunt." I said, "What?" And all these light bulbs, and my heart started pounding, and I started sweating, and I was like, "What? You've been to boarding school, Dad?" And he started telling us the story. And I asked him, I said, why do you never tell that story? It's too hard. It's hard to talk about. It's too hard to talk about. And then he swore, "Don't you ever tell anybody else as long as I'm alive what happened to him." Like, he's so ashamed of the sexual abuse. So ashamed of sexual abuse. He's homophobic. Like, he doesn't believe in two-spirit relatives like I believe in my two-spirit relatives. He believed that that was as a result of trauma. Because that happened to him. And if you mention any of the word gay or any of those, those really derogatory terms about how we talk about two-spirit people, he would personalize that because he'd been sexually abused by other men. It's weak. And so, man, there's layers to this stuff. I have a whole rest of the presentation that I was supposed to do, except last night, and Dr. Waller said, "Albert, you know what, if you just talk about those first few slides, just talk about that, that'd probably be enough." Because what we're seeing in our communities today is a revitalization of our language, revitalization of our culture, our ceremonies. This young woman sang that song for us in her language. That's the healing. That's what we're talking about, 7th-generation healing. That's what I am blessed to get to do back home in Sacramento, California, at the Native American Health Center in my practice, is I get to share cultural healing knowledge. We actually have a trained herbologist. She's a medical herbologist. She is teaching us about food as medicine, bioregional diets, right? Paleo eating. What people ate in that region. And you go back and we think about diabetes and hypertension. We didn't have those things because we ate. We ate minimal amounts of meat. Last night, I got there's this restaurant and there was like this beef, but I was trying not to eat the beef, but everybody was saying, "Man, they got the best beef." Because I'm assimilated, don't you know? I'm working on this thing. This thing won't leave me alone. It calls me everywhere I go. And it loves beef. And, but in those days, she's teaching us that we ate mostly plants and berries and nuts and very limited amounts of meat. Fish, deer, squirrel, snake, rabbit. We ate, and the meat was very healthy in terms of fats. And so we're learning that. That's what we're asking you all to understand in the work that you do. As we value our non-native relatives that want to come and help us, we value you. And I know as a native man, I'm having to learn to not think and be victimized anymore. But I don't forget about what happened. I understand that that really did happen. Genocide happened. How do we get into the healing? I shared yesterday, Pat Nelson was here. I've been coming to this community probably since 2005, trying to help in the best way that I can. And you got Pat here, will teach you the same exact things that I've been saying, except nobody listens to him, which is ironic. I'm like, but you got Pat. He's here. Maybe he says it differently. He has a different way. His approach is maybe a little different. But dang it, he's saying the same thing. We got to get back to our culture. We got to get back to our language, our ceremonies, our way of eating, those old way of life. And we have to help our relatives who want to come and help that are non-native to understand. Also, because embedded in our cultural teachings are levels of DBT. Definitely CBT is in there, CBI, EMDR. I mean, it's embedded in the culture. There was a time in our department where we were all indigenous. All 4 of our LCSWs are KDACs, and then I was the spiritual leader, and every last person was Native American. And that in our department, everything we did was based in this foundation of indigenous teaching and knowledge, along with our Western trained brains as well. It can be done. Our treatment plans were in a circle. Mind, body, spirit. Emotional, mental, physical, spirit. That when one part of our body is out of balance, it causes us to be out of balance in another part of our spirit, of our energy. So how do we get back in balance in an indigenous framework? It's very powerful. And I'm really, really thankful that I get an opportunity to come and share. It's a lot of information crammed into 60 minutes or whatever. And I hope that I was able to impact some of your knowledge about this idea of historical and intergenerational trauma. Because it's with us, and it's going to be with us for some generations. Epigenetics teaches us that, right? And we have some work to do. But we can do this together because we're all in this room together. We're sitting around the sacred fire together. Not one without the other can we do this. We can't do it alone. You can't do it by yourself. We can't do it by ourselves. We're going to try, I guarantee you. I know a lot of relatives say, we don't need nobody else. We just got to come and do this by ourselves. But there's a lot. Some of this history that was given to us isn't ours. We got to find a way to give that back and to reclaim our own identity, our own values, our own traditions. Because they work. They help. And we see it. This young woman came up and offered a song in her language. Very powerful. Raised my dopamine levels to probably an 80. Right? It's true, man. I really appreciate Dr. Waller's teachings because brain is a very powerful organ in our body. So with that, I just want to say thank you for allowing me to come. Wule Mutakma. Wule Mutakma means from my heart to your heart. From my spirit to your spirit. That's how much in words that I can say. I'm grateful for being here. I want to say thank you.